All right, there we go. Um, I just want to begin by saying hi. If you didn't catch earlier, my name is Raina Weimer. I am Advocacy and Outreach Manager for Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. And you are right now in the session titled Climate Smart Agriculture, What You Need to Know. We've only got a little bit less than 45 minutes now and three wonderful speakers here with us today. So I'll get us started very quickly by contextualizing PAIPL's climate smart agriculture work. We've been following the Farm Bill pretty closely for a couple years now. And if you're not aware, the Farm Bill is a large piece of federal legislation concerning agriculture and food practices in the United States. It passes every 5 years, and each time it passes, it sets new rules for our food and agriculture systems. The Farm Bill is the largest investment in conservation that our government makes annually. PAIPL in particular feels strongly that we should be safeguarding the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Hunger is a huge climate issue, and people of faith are particularly committed to advancing food justice across Pennsylvania. And the specific thing that we are looking at is that the latest version of the House Farm Bill doesn't include a transition to SNAP for Puerto Rico. As far as I'm aware, current updates, Pennsylvania is home to more than 100,000 Puerto Ricans who do remain connected to friends and family on the island, and U.S. citizens residing in Puerto Rico do not have access to SNAP benefits. That's something that we are in particular advocating for, something that I'll invite you to take action on at the end, and something that I just wanted to mention to contextualize some of our work in this space. PEIPL has also been in conversation and collaboration with some small farms across the state, and that includes Garfield Community Farm here in Pittsburgh, which I'll briefly shout out because John Crazy, the farm's executive director, is here with us today. Being mindful of the time, just kind of went through really quickly. I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Ezra Thrush serves as Senior Advisor for Penn Future. In this role, he advocates for strong environmental, energy, conservation, and agriculture policy. Specifically, Ezra leads federal work, including the Farm Bill and appropriations and regulatory solar, electric vehicles, democracy, and conservation funding issues, among others in Pennsylvania. And yep, just being mindful of the time, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and talk about the work that you do and your thoughts about climate smart agriculture, Ezra. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Renika, and thanks to the PAIPL team for having me today. I'm excited to be here and join this esteemed panel of my colleagues here and to talk more about climate smart agriculture, or CSA is what we call it. I know sometimes folks think of CSA and they think of the boxes that you get from farms, but this is a different CSA, climate smart agriculture. And it's really important because it's getting a lot of play this year as we're working to pass a new updated farm bill. Some things are happening around the climate smart agriculture practice that I want to make sure that we pay special attention to. As Ranik had mentioned, we have not completed or passed a new farm bill yet. They're supposed to be passed every 5 years, but we're looking at a deadline of tomorrow for the current iteration to lapse. If we don't have passage of the bill by tomorrow, it's going to lapse for a couple months. And from what I'm hearing from folks in Washington, will likely House Democrats and House Republicans alike are trying to get something done by the end of this calendar year. So there's some hope there. But I say this in particular because we had something that passed in 2018 that was a pretty strong, robust farm bill. And 5 years after that, we were working on rolling out the programs attached to the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. One critical part of the Inflation Reduction Act that Congress passed and Vice President Harris signed, or I'm sorry, Vice President Harris gave like the tie-breaking vote, and then President Biden signed into law, is just something that we've never seen before. It's just $2 billion worth of climate smart agriculture money that's attached to the ag stuff that we do in across the country. There's a lot of this money that can come back to Pennsylvania and already has started to come back to Pennsylvania through the U.S. Department of Agriculture and then through the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. This is really important, but one of the sticking points with negotiations that we're hearing is that the House Republican version of legislative language that we've seen so far basically gets rid of the climate guardrails, and something that we've been able to get done through the Inflation Reduction Act, and just makes everything just title, block money for conservation writ large, and just lets the states figure out what they want to do on that. That's a problem because it gets away as something that we did pretty significantly in climate. And it's a problem because not every state in the country is going to implement that the same way. And we really need climate practices all across the country. We need everything to be very strong, and we don't want to roll back what the achievements through the Inflation Reduction Act with this next farm bill. All that to say, what is climate smart agriculture? It sounds like a funny phrase. What it could mean something to several different people differently. The way the U.S. Department of Agriculture lays it out is they say it's a set of practices that helps farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to manage their land to address climate change and food security. It could take the practice of a couple different things here. Soil management practices such as crop rotation. I know that we see a lot of this in Pennsylvania. Tillage, mulching, rotational grazing, those kinds of things. Contour planting, a technique that helps reduce soil erosion. So soil erosion helps us with this in the conservation work. We also see nutrient management is really important to this. And if you're familiar with agriculture, or if you're not, you might have heard of the 4 R's of nitrogen management. We have a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sedimentation involved in agriculture. We have to talk about the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. All that to say, climate smart agriculture practices build existing farming practices. They're designed to increase productivity. They're designed to enhance resilience and to reduce emissions. We have some significant emissions in agriculture space, and so we're trying to do whatever we can to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to do whatever we can in Pennsylvania, but also, countrywide to adapt to climate change. And we want to sustainably intensify agriculture. In Pennsylvania, we do this in a number of ways. One thing I like to point out is you'll see this to orchards in particular or vineyards. Alley cropping is a significant practice, and that's trying to stack crops on crops. In particular, you can have agroforestry of elderberry inside of a forested riparian buffer that's on your farm that is abutting like a stream or creek. And we can have several different eco services or co-benefits from that crop area. Something else that climate smart agriculture takes into account is gender inequality and gender discrimination. I just want to call that out because I think that's important to mention. The USDA and the United Nations both agree that that's really important. Women farmers are often more vulnerable to climate risk than men, so that's something that USDA and the UN wanted to mention and call out. And younger folks too, younger folks and older folks. So we have to pay attention to that. In Pennsylvania, our agriculture population, the folks who work in farming and ranching and forestry landowners are getting to an age where they're starting to retire and they're starting to get out of the work. We also have a significant challenge in bringing younger folks and the next generation into agriculture. So climate smart agriculture also looks at the social practices and social values and implementing that into agriculture. I wanted to just mention a couple other examples um, of this work. Farms also can mitigate floods and protect communities from downstream impacts. So we do a lot of work around planting cover crops and tree buffers and meadow buffers. If you have a field in your farm that's fallow or not being used for a crop at a certain point in time, a lot of times in Pennsylvania, you'll see farmers will plant a meadow buffer or a lot of grassland species, or we'll plant a lot of wildfire flower species, and that really helps slow down the rate at which the rain will come off the fields and go into the creeks and streams and rivers. It'll also capture a lot of the nutrients that we see in the non-point source runoff in the agriculture pollution. This also protects and enhances the quality of our soil. A lot of folks will think of trees will capture and sequester carbon. Uh, the tree buffers that we plant on our farms and the grasses and the kind of crops that we plant on our farms, even on the fields that aren't in production, crop production, that's also carbon sequestration. That's another example of it. I wanted to just also mention, we also talk about solar and solar photovoltaic power generation, where we have agrivoltaics. We have solar generation can be put in the same place as your crops. In Pennsylvania, we're starting to see this more and more, where we'll have meadows where sheep will graze, or goats, or other kinds of or cows even will graze underneath solar facilities. So we see now more and more. I grew up in Franklin County, which is in the south central part of the state, and we're starting to see more and more where farmers, especially in the dairy industry, will install lots of solar plants and solar installations, and they'll have the cows underneath the solar. And it's pretty interesting because if you know anything about the dairy industry in Pennsylvania, the profit margins are not strong and they've been hit for a number of years. And so they're looking for it's a win-win-win because they're going to be able to get some money back. They can help with moving towards more clean energy and renewable energy. And then these fields can also be used for animals at the same time, the solar facilities. And we also have a lot of work to be doing on building out solar on our barns and our farms, and just climate smart agriculture is not just the natural or the green solutions, but also mixing the clean and renewable energies on your property at the same time that you're using for crop production or for other kinds of conservation practices. So I want to stop there. I'm eager to talk more about this when we get to the Q&A portion. I could talk about this for quite some time, but I grew up in a part of Pennsylvania that's very heavy in agriculture, and sometimes you'll see folks who think you have to be either an environmentalist or a farmer, or you have to be somebody who's a faith-based person or somebody who's very into green things. And I wanted to challenge that. I want to say uh, that's not the case at all. You can be a person of faith and be somebody who wants to practice good environmental and conservation work. You can be a farmer and an environmentalist. I think it's all really important. It gets me back to the triple bottom values system that a lot of us should strive toward, and I think we can do it. Let's keep pushing for a farm bill that's just. Let's keep pushing for a farm bill that brings due value and money back to people of Pennsylvania and to farmers and folks who work in agriculture, specifically at the intersection of sustainability and taking care of folks. And I think we can do it. So I'll stop there, and without running into anybody else's time, Ranika, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ezra. I'm sure we'll have some time to talk more about that. This is really interesting. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Madison Mayhew, who is our next speaker. Madison supports interfaith power and lights advocacy work in Washington, D.C. as a federal policy manager. Madison joined IPL after working with the United Church of Christ in their policy office, where she learned more about the power of faith-based organizing and the value of moral imagination in addressing the climate crisis. She has a master's degree in social work from Washington University in St. Louis and a bachelor's in social work from Lipscomb University. She is most happy in the summer sun, sitting amongst wild things, and watching birds with her partner. Right. Thanks for being here, Madison.
Thanks, Renika. And thank you so much for Ezra for providing some Pennsylvania context to the conversation, and look forward to hearing more in that context with John's presentation as well. I'm going to build off of what has been said. Renika, do you mind giving me presentation sharing capabilities?
Absolutely. Interestingly, it looks like I don't have that option in a breakout room. That might be the issue.
Okay. Can I maybe send you my PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. But as while we're getting set up here, and I'll message the link in the chat as well, just in case that's easier. All right. While we're getting set up here, I do have some images that kind of break down that build a lot off of what Ezra was talking about in terms of emissions in agriculture. And oh, beautiful, already good to go. Just want to highlight that one major thing that is important to know is that agriculture makes up 11% of US emissions. And most of that 11% comes from nitrous oxide, from using chemical fertilizers, methane from animals or even their waste, and even carbon dioxide. And compared to some other industries, emissions from agriculture are actually on the rise. I have a graph that hopefully we can see in a minute that shows, oh, beautiful. Go to the next slide. So this graph demonstrates, as you can see, compared to other industries in terms of emissions, agriculture sits within that 11%. And the next slide. So as you can see here, compared to every other major industry, ever so slightly, the agriculture industry's emissions is on the rise. And if we stay on the path that we're on, agriculture will be the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And so this farm bill and the next farm bill are going to be really important in terms of addressing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that the agriculture sector emits. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that the bill includes climate smart agriculture practices and supports farmers who want to implement those practices so that we can ultimately meet our goals as outlined in the Paris Climate Agreement. Go to the next slide. Ezra did a beautiful job talking about climate smart agriculture, so don't want to be too repetitive here. Just a reminder that climate smart agriculture is typically defined by 3 major areas: increasing productivity, enhancing resilience, and reducing emissions. And as Ezra said, climate smart agriculture doesn't necessarily define new farming practices. It includes and builds upon many practices that farmers and ranchers already use, like cover cropping, nutrient management, and conservation tillage. And ultimately advancing these practices with the goal of adapting to the current climate or preventing any potential impacts to it is what makes them climate smart. Go to the next slide. Thinking about the Farm Bill, I know this has been said already, but I think it's really important just to highlight the monstrosity of a bill the Farm Bill is. It is a 5-year funding package. Typically with the federal government, budgets are passed in 1-year increments. So the fact that the Farm Bill is a 5-year budget bill means that it's freaking huge. And it defines how our food is grown, what kinds of food is grown. It has an impact on farming livelihoods. And it even covers programs ranging from crop insurance, helping food access for low-income families, supporting beginning farmers, all those kinds of things. Every 5 years, typically, every 5 years, the Farm Bill expires and is updated. It goes through an extensive process like any other bill in Congress, where it is proposed by each house, is debated by each house, and ultimately combined into one major package, where it's ultimately signed into law by the president. The Farm Bill's chapters are called titles, as you can see here. The numbers and the substance matter of the titles can change over time. Can go to the next slide. This is a graph. Obviously, this is projected 2023. We've passed 2023, but demonstrates kind of where the funding lands within the Farm Bill. As you can see, the biggest chunk of Farm Bill funding goes towards feeding people who are hungry and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also called SNAP. And the rest of the Farm Bill flows to farmers, which make up about that remaining 20%. And about 11% of that chunk goes to farmers through subsidies, and a smaller percentage goes to farmers through USDA conservation programs. Go to the next slide. I think we went back. Uh-oh. We'll keep moving along. Oh wait, I'm sorry. My brain is thinking this was the past slide. Still recovering from a long travel weekend, but we're here. So there are two kinds of farm subsidies, and this, remember, is 11% of that Farm Bill funding. So you're seeing commodity subsidies, which look like corn, soy, cotton, rice, and peanuts. And most of these subsidies flow to a handful of states in the Midwest, as you can see by those red highlighted states. Most of these subsidies go to farmers producing feed, not food. And about 44% of all commodity subsidies go to farmers producing corn and or soy for that animal feed over nutritious food. The second part of subsidies is called crop insurance subsidies, and these are available to many more farmers and make up a big portion of the farm safety net. Go to the next slide. Within that chunk of the pie, we see these working lands conservation programs. And these programs ultimately provide support to farmers who are implementing these climate smart practices on their farms. The first is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. I know this is getting a little technical, but it's important to, I think, understand kind of in the weeds about these programs. This is also called EQIP for short. As you can see, it offers technical and financial assistance for working lands. It helps farmers maintain or improve production while conserving natural resources. Only 20% of these funds go towards climate smart programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, while 5% of EQIP funding goes towards practices that actually increase emissions, which is pretty problematic when the main goal of these programs is conservation. And it's important to note that within the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the USDA currently turns away 2 out of every 3 farmers seeking conservation assistance. And so that conservation funding within EQIP is overprescribed and not enough funding to meet the demand of farmers wanting to implement these practices. The second is the Conservation Stewardship Program. This provides financial assistance for conservation activities, improving soil health, all really wonderful conservation programs. But a lot of the funding in both of these programs, as I mentioned, don't actually go towards climate smart practices. And we want to ensure that any programs within the USDA lands conservation programs are ultimately going towards practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We want to ensure that these programs prioritize funding farmers that are working to reduce emissions, and ultimately no USDA conservation funding should go towards practices that increase emissions. And then go next slide, please. So this, as I mentioned a little bit already, this demonstrates and paints a picture of what that EQIP funding looks like. A small chunk goes towards climate smart practices. The rest are non-climate smart practices, and then there's that small chunk that actually increase emissions. Go to the next slide. I know I just threw a lot of information at you, kind of in the weeds on the Farm Bill, but now kind of want to lean into some of the framing for how IPL has approached the Farm Bill, and will continue to do so in the next couple of weeks. We work together with many of our national faith partners to ultimately define what we would call faithful principles for a climate smart Farm Bill. And this is just an overview of what we have created here. And I'll put the full PDF and the details if you want to go more in the weeds on the document in the chat. But ultimately defined faithful principles as F, frontline, Black, Indigenous people of color, elderly, youth, and/or disabled communities must be centered in the policy framework. We want to accelerate the transition to a sustainable agricultural and food system that supports small and medium holder farmers and local food economies. We want to invest in climate resiliency and diverse crop insurance. We would like to see a transformation of farm subsidies from supporting majority commodity crops to more specialty crops. And we want to honor creation through the protection of land, the elimination of waste, and the reduction of harmful farm practices that result in high greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, with the current state of Congress, this is certainly more of a prophetic vision of what we really call for a farm bill, and really believe that what communities of faith can lean into in imagining what a just and equitable farm bill could look like. And as you know, noting that how high emissions are within the agricultural system, and how climate smart agriculture can really address those emissions, hoping that these principles kind of help lay an outline of how to really bring about that vision. And go to the next slide. So with that farm bill or those faith principles in mind, and Ezra did a great job talking about the kind of the status of Congress right now and where things are, and we'll take a look a little bit more at that in a minute. But because we are kind of in a really tight time crunch to potentially pass a farm bill, these are the priorities that we're focusing on right now. We want to protect and fully fund the SNAP program, ensure that those who are hungry have the resources and the financial support to get access to nutritious food. I really appreciate Renika's framing of understanding that people who are hungry and who are there's a very strong intersection between people who are hungry and on the front lines of climate, and want to make sure that we are being holistic in our approach in our climate solutions. We want to protect the climate funding in the Inflation Reduction Act, that $20 billion that Ezra talked about, that is really specifically set aside to enhance climate smart agriculture within those USDA conservation programs. And what we're hoping and what we're advocating for is adding what's called climate guardrails to the baseline of the text, which essentially protects that funding from being used or shifted around to any other part within the Farm Bill, which is essentially what many members of Congress are threatening to do. And we are saying people of faith have organized and advocated to protect that, to not only pass the IRA, but ensure the funding goes to those who need it most. And then, of course, ensure that most conservation funding reduces greenhouse gas emissions through EQIP and CSP. We want to prioritize programs that bring those numbers down instead of keep them neutral or even increase them. We'll go to the next slide. So looking a little bit, taking a step back and looking at the state of play and where things are right now, it kind of takes us back a little bit, but back in January of last year was the first deadline for both House and Senate Agriculture Committees to have their hearings and kind of set forth their state of play for the Farm Bill before the 2018 version expired. That bill's deadline was September 30th of 2023. And what we saw happen was Congress extended that Farm Bill version for 1 year, and it expires tomorrow. And that was back in November of last year. And so we're seeing a lot of struggle of Congress to pass not only the Farm Bill budget, but our overall fiscal year budget. For those who may not be tracking it as closely as unfortunately I have to, it took Congress, I think, 4 times last year to pass a budget. They kept passing what's called continuing resolutions. And what we're seeing this fiscal year cycle is that they're passing another continuing resolution, which is what's pushing the budget conversation and the Farm Bill conversation to the lame duck session after the election early November. So what we know with the CR that has just passed for 2025 is that the Farm Bill programs were not included in that budget package. So again, all of those Farm Bill negotiations are going to be pushed to a very short timeline of late November through the end of the year to pass a Farm Bill. And again, I think it's really important to emphasize that this is not your typical 1-year budget bill. This is a massive 5-year budget bill that takes a ton of negotiating. And as Ezra said, the most recent House version wasn't even voted on the floor. It didn't have support. The Senate hasn't released their version of the bill. So there's a massive amount of work that still needs to be done in order to pass a comprehensive farm bill before the end of the year. So we have a busy couple of weeks ahead of us, and look forward to working with all of you to make sure that we can make that happen. But I will stop there and pass it back to Renika.
Thank you, Madison, for giving us a look inside what is, like you said, truly a massive bill with lots of different components to learn about. I'm going to introduce now John Creasy, who is the founder and executive director of Garfield Community Farm, as well as a founding pastor of the Open Door Presbyterian Church. For over 15 years, John has worked to create an ecologically diverse neighborhood farm on nearly 3 acres of land at the top of the Garfield neighborhood. John leads a great staff at the farm who collectively lead hundreds of students and volunteers each year. The farm serves the neighborhood as an open community green space and as a site for ecological education. I want to thank you for being here, and I will pass the mic over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more philosophically about what climate smart agriculture looks like from a big picture kind of land use philosophy. So I am a, as you heard, I'm a permaculture designer, and I'm a pastor, and I am the executive director of Garfield Community Farm. So permaculture for me is one of the it was one of the introductions for me into what it could look like for us to live on this planet and get what we need from it, while also seeing ecological restoration happen. The first thing that I want to point out about almost all of the practices that farmers are being encouraged to practice, to implement, all of these practices are in one way or another doing agriculture as though we're doing ecological restoration. So all climate smart agriculture is a shift from kind of brute force agriculture to understanding our agriculture as building of ecologies. If we think of the succession that happens on a piece of land, going from say a forest fire has come through, really bad ones kind of wiped things out, and then there's a multi-year or even multi-decade process of land restoration that naturally happens, that slowly happens. Our primary form of doing agriculture in the United States for a very long time has been every year to bring a field back to that earliest stage of succession. So to remove everything and to even till the soil. So if we think of when in nature is soil turned over, there aren't many times in nature that soil is lifted up and turned over. It's about the most damaging thing we can do to an ecosystem, to remove all plant life and then take the soil and mix it up with a tiller. And this releases lots of carbon. So all of the climate smart approaches are in an attempt to not turn soil over, not till soil, and find a place where we can grow food within a different kind of era of the succession process. So, I mean, forests, young forests are a great place to grow lots of fruit, lots of nuts, berries. So we design at Garfield Community Farm, we've designed the farm to be what we call a food forest. So a multi-layer space ecosystem where food is being grown in all of those different layers. Now, if we allowed succession to keep going, so that the canopy is the main layer in our canopies, 100 feet up in the air, we're not going to be able to grow quite as much. That's great for climate, but it's not great for food production. So the area of succession in that timeline, the kind of area that we want to be in is the young forest area. So we can grow from the ground all the way up through the canopy, fruits, nuts, berries, even vegetables and root crops. We can bring chickens throughout the food forest. That's one example. That's how we are kind of locating a spot within the progress that we see happen in succession, in natural succession. We've located a space, and that's where we're developing our agricultural practices here at Garfield Community Farm. But all of these practices, like I said, that are climate smart are thinking about, whether we know it or not, really, we're thinking about succession in a way that we can place our agriculture in a healthy spot, instead of at that very beginning spot where in nature, maybe it's an earthquake happens and the soil gets mixed up, or a giant landslide. I mean, we see that happening in North Carolina now. I mean, it's tragic what this climate fueled catastrophe that's happened this weekend in Western North Carolina with the hurricane and the rain. About as damaging as you can get, a landslide. Maybe that's the only time that naturally soil is just turned over. Yeah, those are the pieces that I wanted to share. So I'll hand it back over, and I don't know if we have some Q&A time.
Thank you. So yeah, I will say that the breakout rooms won't close, but people will be invited back to the main space at 3:15. So we do have a couple minutes for Q&A. If anybody's got 1 or 2 questions on their mind, I'll just open that space now. Yeah.
John, what was the driver for tilling in the first place in agriculture?
Well, it just gives a really easy starting point. And so we've got to figure out how can we grow our annual crops, and we have figured out and are putting into practice ways of growing annual crops without disturbing the soil so much. Light tilling, or even using different sorts of mulch and sheet mulching. Ezra, you might be able to speak on that too.
Yeah, I'll just add, when I don't think about climate, I think of clean water and land conservation. That's kind of how I got started in all this stuff, and that's really where my passion lies. But I'll say a lot of folks who work in clean water in particular, they're big advocates of no-till and no-till cropping, and so I highly recommend that. And there are ways to do it. It's a little outside the box, but actually the practice goes way, way back. It's actually a traditional form of farming before we had lots of tillage. But it's something that folks I think forgot about over many, many years. And so it feels like a brand new thing, but it's not. But no-till, in addition to everything that John just said, no-till is something that I think about a lot when I think about water quality, but it certainly has climate impacts as well.
Yeah, anytime we have soil that's dry, carbon is being released into the atmosphere. So soil that gets turned, a lot more air gets in there. It dries out more quickly. So no-till methods allow the soil structure to stay in place, the fungi to stay in place, carbon sequestration to remain in place in the soil. And rotational grazing is a great example of less need for annual agriculture in raising of meat, whether it's pastured poultry or pigs or cattle. if we can allow cattle and things to be on pasture that never gets tilled and is diverse in what's growing there, then the cattle get everything they need, and the soil is restored by their manure and by the roots of those plants that die back and regrow and die back and regrow as the cattle eat. So there's just so many really exciting things out there, ways of doing agriculture that actually make agriculture a solution instead of the problem.
I just want to let everyone know that we did get a message that our 30-minute break begins now, and that there are a couple other breakout rooms that are options to join during the break if folks are interested. The reason I'm saying that is because there's a community garden discussion option, an option for a chat with Pendle Hill, and an option for a chat with Penn Future, as well as an option for a chat with the PA Bright program. The PA Bright program involves installing solar panels on residential houses. Pendle Hill is a really awesome Quaker retreat center that has a lot of wisdom to share. That's just some extra context. So, and I just wanted to flag that for everyone so that they know that there are options. There's also more information about that in the main room. I know that we still have some questions, and everyone's been sharing some awesome information. So I'm wondering if maybe to finish up, if everybody who spoke today would be all right just dropping an email in the chat for follow-ups. And I can also do the same to connect folks with people that might have some answers to the questions that they still have.
And Renica, this is Bill. Before we go away, I wanted to mention a great tutorial for the things that John, Ezra, and Madison have been talking about. The movie Common Ground, which was shown last night as part of the IPL Film Festival, but not a lot of people got to see it then. I'm sure it's available through other channels, sharing ways, but it is a great introduction to just what John was talking about, the damage that is done by the tillage type of agriculture to especially industrial scale farming, the damage that is done, and the alternatives that involve very low till or no till agriculture, really relying on those fungal networks to bring nutrients to the plants that are being planted, so that you don't need to use a lot of pesticides, you don't need to use a lot of fertilizer or herbicides. It's common ground. I'd highly recommend it for people who want to dig a little deeper into these topics.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
That
so
sounds
much.
great.
Yeah. All right. Well, then I will see everybody else in the main room. Thank you, Madison and Ezra and John, for being here and sharing your knowledge with us today. And thank you, everybody who took some time to also participate in this discussion and be here with us.